The House Committee on Labor will come to order. Mr. Clerk, please take the roll.
Chair Hatzma.
Here.
Representative Menser.
Here.
Olzar.
Here.
O'Neill.
Present.
Andrews.
Here.
Churches.
Present.
Wagella. Wozniak.
Here.
Mueller.
Here.
Kuntz.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. May I have a motion to adopt the minutes of the June 22, 2023 meeting? Representative Colzar makes that motion. The minutes are adopted. We're here this morning to receive testimony on House Bill 4468. We have before us, though, a conflict substitute due to changes from Public Act 115. Did I not say 4688? If I didn't, I'm told it's 4688. I thought that's what I said, and if I didn't correct it, she would be whispering in my ear for the next 5 minutes, so it's corrected now. Vice Chair Menser makes a motion to adopt the H1 substitute to 4468.
4688.
Will the clerk please take the roll?
On the motion to adopt the substitute, Chair Hatzma.
Here.
Yes.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm looking at script and it says 4468, but it is 4688.
Representatives Menser.
Yes.
Olzar.
Yes.
O'Neill.
Yes.
Andrews.
Yes.
Churches.
Yes.
Wagella. Wozniak.
No.
Mueller.
No.
Kuntz.
No.
Mr. Chair, you have 6 yeas, 3 nay, and 0 pass. The substitute is adopted.
Thank you. I'd like to put the H1 version of the House Bill 4688 before the committee. That would amend the Public Employment Relations Act to add minimum staffing levels to the list of mandatory bargaining subjects. The issue here is, should employees through the collective bargaining process have the ability to negotiate staffing levels during contract negotiations? This bill would make those discussions a mandatory topic. It doesn't require anything. It simply mandates a discussion if one side raises the topic. The cost of avoiding these discussions is evident in staffing shortages we know of every day in our police departments, fire departments, courts, and corrections facilities. We won't attract more workforce into these careers unless we start having discussions about safety and well-being of workers. I'd like to welcome Matt Saar to discuss the bill. Matt.
Good morning, Chair Hatzma, members of the committee.
Good morning.
My name is Matt Saar. I'm president of the Michigan Professional Firefighters Union. We represent more than 5,000 full-time firefighters in the state of Michigan who protect 80% of the state's population. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to you today on the importance of House Bill 4688. We all know that Michigan is facing a workforce shortage, but were you aware also that also applies to our firefighters? We are roughly 500 to 1,000 paramedics short of what is needed to protect our communities and deliver on the public's expectations of positive outcomes and that are safely and quickly. Our current ranks are also quickly aging out of the profession, with very few backfilling the need. Michigan is woefully behind our neighboring states, with 50 firefighters per 100,000, while Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio have more than 100 per 100,000 residents. House Bill 4688 will not immediately fix the staffing crisis. However, it will allow for firefighters to make the conversation of staffing a priority during the bargaining process. Mandatory subjects of bargaining are those that impact wages, hours, and working conditions. These are subjects that must be bargained if either party presents a proposal. This legislation would add minimum staffing as a mandatory subject of bargaining. There are many communities across the state that have cut staffing levels below what is required by the OSHA standard, which is CFR 291910.134, known as 2 in and 2 out. and the National Fire Protection Association standard of 1710, which recommends that each company be staffed with 4 firefighters, including 1 officer, and put a minimum of 17 firefighters on a fire scene. The standards were instituted with the understanding that more firefighters available to respond and arrive early to a structure fire, and the less time it takes to extinguish the fire, perform search and rescue activities, thus reducing the risk of injury and death to both firefighters and the trapped occupants, reducing the economic loss to the property. As I mentioned, this legislation allows the conversation to happen at the bargaining table, but it does not mandate that a certain number of firefighters be hired. This enables the employer and the employees to work together to develop sustainable solutions to the staffing crisis while protecting our communities and firefighters. I ask that you support House Bill 4688. I also want to touch on, by passing 4688, we're not asking for relief on Public Act 312. The number one factor on Public Act 312 is the ability to pay. We are not asking for that relief. So by saying that, we've heard the rumors that if we go out and we pass 4688, we're going to be mandated to hire 100 more firefighters, or we're going to be mandated to hire more people. This is a conversation. The onus will be on the employer and our bargaining groups to come into an agreement on what is best for the community and if they can afford it. We are, again, not seeking relief on Public Act 312. The factor, again, I would love to talk to you right now about the emotional arguments about firefighters' death and injury. We can talk about that, and those are real. But what we should be really talking about that is aligned with that is the resident safety. Protecting our members, in turn, protects our residents, your constituents. By putting more firefighters on the scene, it allows us to make a quick stop on that fire and help trapped occupants. It also relates right to our medical scenes as well. Our staffing relates to both of these. So it's, for me, it's, it is a personal issue. I still work as a firefighter every day. I work for East Point Fire Department in southeastern Macomb County. We're a busy, small community that honestly is understaffed, and we need the ability to have the conversation, not a mandate, a conversation. So to me, it's unimaginable that anyone could say that staffing as a mandatory subject is a bad thing. This puts the public safety and our resident safety on the table where it belongs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saar. Questions? Thank you for your testimony. We next have Dave Hodgkins from the city of Wyoming, Michigan, as well as Scott Smith from Michigan Municipal League, and Scott Smith from the city of Wyoming, Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to members of this committee for the opportunity to be here today. Dave Hodgkins with the Michigan Municipal League, and I am joined by Scott Smith from the city of Wyoming today. I'm going to turn it over in just a second to Scott to really outline some of our concerns and thoughts regarding 4688 today, but I do just want to acknowledge the testimony that came before us, because I think it's important to note that a lot of our communities around the state, the league, our members, really agree with the need to be able to adequately staff our municipal service employees. The league has for a long time also advocated that when we have these conversations, we also make sure that at the forefront of those discussions is the need to properly provide the resources for our communities to also be able to do those things. And so I look forward to having that conversation with you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee as well. So with that, Scott, if you want to.
Sure. My name is Scott Smith. I'm the Wyoming City Attorney. I've held that position since 2018. Before that, for 38 years, I worked in law firms and served as general and special counsel for several dozen cities, townships, villages, and counties throughout the state of Michigan, from Mackinac City to New Buffalo and everywhere in between. So I've worked with communities with full-time, part-time, volunteer, and contracted fire and police services, and have a good perspective. I've worked on interlocal agreements providing for fire services, police services, EMT services, have worked on legislation that allows for such interlocal agreements and otherwise provides for police and fire. Wyoming's committed to firefighter safety. It drove efforts to increase fire staffing with a failed income tax proposal, followed by a successful property tax proposal that was tied to public safety. It all goes to police and fire. The city's also invested ARPA funds in fire station improvements, and it's also simultaneously in the process of purchasing 2 additional fire vehicles. So we are committed to fire safety and have a long time been proponents of that. Local governments have several concerns about 4688. If it's intended to address unsafe fire department staffing levels, it won't accomplish that goal. Most fire departments in this state are volunteer fire departments. This bill will only address those fire departments that have collective bargaining agreements. So it won't address the least well-funded, fire departments. Those are less well-funded, less equipped, less trained, and in places without fire hydrants. So in most of the jurisdictions throughout the state, this bill will have no impact. It doesn't allude to safety as an objective. So collective bargaining over staffing levels could focus on staffing that will not impact safety. For example, we've had proposals from the fire department asking for staffing levels at command ranks that don't directly affect on-scene fire safety. Another reason the municipalities are opposed to this bill is that the bill applies to all bargaining units, including public works, general office, staff, police, and so forth. Staffing levels are a problem throughout communities. In Wyoming, we had 420 full-time equivalents in the year 2004. It was down to 331 full-time equivalents in 2011 due to the Great Recession. It's only back up to 392 now. So we're operating, despite increases in population and housing units, at staffing levels well below what we've historically had. The tax revenues we had reached their apex in 2008. It wasn't until 2021, after the Great Recession, that we recovered to just the taxing levels of 2008, and that's without any inflationary adjustment. We haven't, if you adjust for inflation, we haven't yet recovered. 4688 is also problematic when it interacts with Public Act 312, because then we have an arbitrator who potentially makes the decision on staffing levels. And while affordability is one consideration the arbitrator's supposed to make, that affordability is in the eye of the beholder. The arbitrator could well decide that you can do with fewer election workers, fewer tax people in the assessor's office, no parks and recreation programs, shutting all of our parks, or doing other kinds of things to make it affordable to hire more firefighters or police officers. In other words, the arbitrator can't make the budgetary decision for us, but the arbitrator can say that it's affordable if you just make the right policy choices and budgetary exercise your budgetary discretion. Staffing level bargaining also removes flexibility needed during economic downturns, and I already highlighted what we had to do in the last economic downturn. Staffing level bargaining reduces voters' abilities to affect policy changes. So one thing that you've heard and I know are considering is rethinking how we provide public safety services, particularly when deploying police officers. And one thing that a number of communities are trying to do is pair police officers with mental health professionals in responding to some incidents. This would eliminate our ability to get creative in how we make those kinds of responses. Correspondingly, and it reduces our ability to adapt to changes in how the services can be provided. If firefighter safety is the issue, there is a better way. offer incentives or impose requirements for safe staffing in various circumstances, tie them to widely recognized standards by accrediting agencies, also make them incident-specific. Staffing needs are different at a fully involved structure fire than for a kitchen fire that's extinguished with a fire extinguisher. Staffing needs are different at a multi-vehicle accident on an interstate highway than for a single-car accident on a private drive. Staffing levels may be reached in a variety of ways. Dispatch protocols can and do provide for immediate dispatching from multiple stations or even multiple departments for certain reported incidents, like an incident at a school or hospital, large retailer, or places where crowd control or evacuation or multiple casualties might be more likely. I say we, the City of Wyoming, me, and the Michigan Municipal League are willing to meet with the firefighters, police unions, or anybody else to try to find a way to achieve the safety goals without eliminating the flexibility or imposing the burden that this bill will impose on local governments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to outline our opposition today and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hodgkins. Thank you, Mr. Smith. We have a question from Representative Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for coming out. But I'm trying to align the two pieces of information. Mr. Saar steps up and says they represent 80% of the population, and then you say that it doesn't affect most fire departments. So I can't ask him a question anymore, and I apologize to connect.
No,
Can you help me?
I think he might be correct in terms of it affecting population, because where do we have the fire departments that are full-time and therefore
cities, okay.
represented by collective bargaining
I
units?
see.
They're in the highly populated areas. So yes, if you're looking at the highly populated areas, he would be right. If you're looking at the number of fire departments in the state, an overwhelming number of them are in rural areas where they're volunteer, part volunteer, and so forth.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Chairman, if I may, brief follow-up. Thank you, sir. You tells me that from 2004 to 2011, it was a downturn in staffing, 420 to 304. I didn't get the numbers written down.
Well, it went to 304 in 2011.
Correct.
You're right, yeah.
Why? Was that a budget decision?
No,
Why?
that
why
was the
did?
Great Recession that hit in 2007 and required us to reduce staff, because when you're a local government, there are certain things, there are only certain parts of the budget that are negotiable or flexible, and one of those is staffing. So we were forced to reduce staff.
Would this prevent that discussion if at the
Well,
next recession?
The difficulty is if I had a collective bargaining agreement in place that required certain staffing levels, I wouldn't have the flexibility to reduce that staffing.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Without bargaining, and I might not be able to reopen the contract to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
You're welcome. Representative Andrews.
Thank you, Chair. Quick question, then a follow-up question. Are you, or at any time, have you ever been a firefighter?
No.
Okay. So what basis do you have for explaining what requirements there are for fighting different types of fires or making different types of calls and the staffing requirements that are required? Because trying to understand how you would determine those differences without that sort of experience.
Well, we already make those determinations when dispatch occurs. For example, one example I used was if we have an accident on a freeway, we're going to dispatch more units and larger units to provide traffic blocking and safe access. If I've got the same kind of incident, but on a private drive and it's a single car accident, then I can do with fewer staff, because I'm not going to have traffic or crowd control or something else as part of the response. Same thing if I know that I've got a fire where the structure's already totally involved, I'm going to dispatch differently than if I don't know that.
And who makes the decision on how many people need to be dispatched to those?
Oftentimes, the dispatch authority or the dispatching personnel will do that based on what's reported.
And is that decision made based just on the staffing levels, or is it made in concert with the fire department?
It's made just on how many units they ask to respond and so forth. And yes, the fire department has input in all of that.
It's fair to say that if they had more staffing, then they could probably respond in greater force to the fires, because then dispatch would be able to send more firefighters?
Dispatch can send as many firefighters as dispatch needs to send. You know, obviously, you know, the response is limited by the protocols we've worked out with dispatch. In our case, we've got a centralized county dispatch.
Thank you.
Representative Colasar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to look around the chair that is right in the way of our viewpoint here. Question, in Wyoming, how many firefighters do you have?
I can give you that number. We have budgeted this year 45,
45 firefighters for how many residents?
76,000.
Okay.
And that's up from 32 back in 2020.
Okay, because I thought I read somewhere you had 11.
No, sir. We've had, never dropped below.
how many
20
full-time do
We've
you
never dropped below 23. We've got 23 full-time, or we've got 45 full-time equivalents is what we've got budgeted this year.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Menser.
Thank you, Chair. I come from the small city of Mount Clemens. We have all of 15,697 residents. We have 4 square miles. We have 12 full-time firefighters, 12. If it weren't for Clinton Township and Harrison Township, we'd be in trouble. Because if I have a firefighter out on vacation and then somebody gets injured, I don't have 2 in and 2 out. So let me be clear in this statement. I will shut down any park, any splash pad, any recreational activity to keep a full-time firefighter and a full-time police department. Thank you.
Representative Wagella.
Thank you for your testimony today. I think one of the issues you brought up is a clear one that we need to address, and it probably won't be addressed in this committee, which is making sure our governments have proper public funding. I think that's a really undervalued piece of what you're saying. But I will also go on to just say that I think anyone who's worked any job recognizes that when staffing levels are not adequate, that severely affects working and safety conditions. And by not allowing public sector workers like firefighters to bargain for staffing, the way I see it is that's cutting off our ability to escalate these issues, or workers' ability to escalate these issues to an appropriate level in a response. So I think this issue is about the funding, but it's also about making sure that our public workers are safe, but also that they have the dignity and respect of being able to collectively bargain and fight for themselves. So roundabout way, my question here is this. If you believe that all workers deserve the right to fight for better working conditions, I'm having a hard time understanding how public sector workers are different. So my question is, do you see that as a right for workers, and can you elaborate on why firefighters might not deserve that same right?
Well, two things. One, we're not talking just about firefighters. So if I'm talking about working conditions and so forth, recognize that everybody in our local government, every department is working at a lower staffing level than they were in the year 2000. We have far fewer employees now than we had back then, and every department could use more staffing. So every time I make a decision on staffing levels, I'm affecting workers and worker safety. If I listen to the DPW workers at a construction site, they're telling me we don't have enough people at construction sites. If I listen to the snowplow drivers, we don't have enough snowplow drivers to keep them from working multiple shifts when we have a polar vortex. So I'm always balancing those interests. If I listen to police officers and business people in the community, we should have double the police department that we've got. And even then, we might not be providing for officer safety and community safety at a level everybody wants. So what I'm telling you is that local governments every day have to make choices. At the same time, I've got you folks and others telling us that I'm supposed to create a sense of place. And I've got to create communities that everybody wants. I've got to create parks and recreational opportunities to reduce juvenile crime. Okay? I've got to do all of these other things. I can't say that I'm not going to hold an election because I don't have election workers. I can't say that I'm no longer going to do assessing or tax collection. So what I'm telling you is that we've got to balance all of those interests and come up with a way to create the community that our citizens expect to have.
Just one quick follow-up, if that's okay. And I understand that. I think that's a real problem, right? I guess the part where I'm losing this is, at what point, all we're talking about is allowing for this to be a part of bargaining, right? Which doesn't mean that a city has to absolutely agree to it, right? So what is so dangerous about allowing public workers to bargain for
Because with police officers
parking?
and firefighters, I've got an arbitrator that makes the decision. So the arbitrator may take their proposal on the staffing level, and then I'm stuck with it.
I mean, is it possible that an arbitrator might make the right decision?
You ask either one of us, and depending on the decision, we'll say it's right or wrong, and depending on the issue that the arbitrator is addressing, it's right or wrong. So, yes, it's possible the arbitrator will make the right decision, but I've also seen arbitrators make decisions that severely impact the local government, and then I don't have the flexibility to do some other things that I need to do. If I get an economic downturn, I'm stuck. You know, what do I do? Then put out the bankruptcy sign?
I can just quickly address that, like a private business would. Local governments have the ability to raise taxes. They have ability to raise revenues in other ways.
Only if the citizens approve that.
And I think that's, how democracy works, right?
Thank you, Representative Wagella. Representative Churches.
Thank you. I just want to acknowledge, I understand that both parties involved in this care about our communities, and the lack of investment in those communities from our government has made both parties feel disenfranchised or fearful of what could or might happen or is happening currently. So I just want to acknowledge that and the service that both sides contribute to the greater good. With that being said, you said something that really resonated with me and made me curious, so maybe you could help me understand. You said that your organization would be willing to have conversations with firefighters about this. And I guess the reason why that causes me concern and why I'd like to understand more is, why hasn't that already happened? And do you think maybe this is a result of that not happening? So making it required maybe won't let it be ignored, because if you already have the choice to do that, I think they're expressing that it hasn't been done, but now you're saying that you'll do it, and that feels reactionary. So maybe you could help me understand as to why it hasn't already been discussed, and
Well, I can tell
what
you.
could be done if not this, like, how do we make firefighters feel supported? Because that's the goal here, is they save lives, and they do it silently most times. And you're responsible for making our cities functional. So I just would like to understand where you're coming from with that.
I can use our city as an example. We've had discussions with our firefighters for a number of years, and as we began to recover and get some of the resources, we began adding firefighters. As we worked with them to develop some idea of what staffing levels might work and come up with the proposals, we tried first with an income tax and then with a property tax. But we've hired 27 additional firefighters in the last couple of years because of those discussions that we've had well in advance of this bill. And I think most local governments are having those discussions to the extent they can. Again, it's a balancing because you've got competing interests, and I've got to address all of those interests. You know, I can't lay off assessors to hire firefighters because I've still got to do the assessing, even though my assessing office is staffed at a lower level than it was a number of years ago as well. I can't say I'm not going to conduct an election and have fewer people in my clerk's office. I can't say that I'm not going to do other functions that I'm obligated to do by the Constitution and state law. So, you know, we work hard to balance all of those interests, and we've worked with our fire department to address some of these issues. As I said, there's a huge amount of funding that's gone into it, not only with the ballot proposal, but with a significant amount of our ARPA funds to improve fire stations, and our motor pool funds investing, I don't know, $1.5 million, $2 million in a couple of new fire vehicles as well. Now, are those things overdue? Sure. But when my tax revenues continued to fall, it was difficult to find our way to hire additional people.
Thank you.
Representative Colasar again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You talked a lot about the arbitrator and them deciding. Correct me if I'm wrong, but an arbitration only happens when there's an impasse, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so how long would the negotiations have had to go on before it gets to that point?
It depends on the situation.
And I guess ability to pay is still covered in PA 312, correct?
It is, but the arbitrator decides what the ability to pay is, and I've seen arbitrators make the decision, look, and tell you, you're just making budget choices. I'm going to tell you, you're going to have to pay to do X, Y, and Z. Now, staffing levels haven't been part of that, but arbitrators have said that you've got to find the way to pay this increase or this pension increase or whatever else might come as a result of the arbitration decision, and decide that all it is budget priorities. You've got to reprioritize your budget.
But the arbitrator is somebody who is neutral. They are objective. They don't, I guess I'm struggling to get to that point with you, because if you are at an impasse, that means negotiations have dragged on for quite some time, and you do need that neutral voice. And to say that they're going to make a decision that is detrimental to the city, I just have a hard time believing that. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony. Mr. Hodgkins, Mr. Smith. Steve DeLee from the Mackinac Center is our next witness speaker. He's on my list of wishing to speak. Is Mr. DeLee here?
Did he maybe go to the overflow room?
He submitted written testimony, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
He put in a card not wishing to speak.
All right. Thank you. Then next we have Michael O'Haron from the Firefighters Union.
Morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you this morning. I do look forward to addressing some of the issues that have been raised by opponents to House Bill 4688. My name is Michael O'Haron. I am the General Counsel for the Michigan Professional Firefighters Union. I have represented firefighters almost exclusively for over 2 decades. I represent several dozen firefighter locals across the state of Michigan. Bargaining staffing levels used to be the normal course of business in collective bargaining in the public sector. It came under attack in the 1980s in a firefighter case involving the city of Trenton, where the discussion was, is staffing a mandatory subject of bargaining if it's reasonably related to staffing or if it's inextricably intertwined with staffing? Those are two very different standards. The city of Jackson took a case to Act 312 arbitration on staffing in the 1990s, and that case dragged through the Court of Appeals and bounced back and forth between the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals until it was finally decided in 1998 that that the union had not proved its case that staffing was sufficiently related to safety to make it a mandatory subject. In 2008, the Oak Park public safety case was decided, and on the heels of that, the Detroit firefighters took an Act 312 injunction case to the Michigan Supreme Court, where Justice Taylor wrote for the majority and adopted the inextricably intertwined with safety standard. Some of the opponents of this bill will have you believe that because we have a standard which came out of that Oak Park case, inextricably intertwined with safety, that is sufficient to protect firefighters and police officers when bargaining with their public employers. I submit to you that last night I did a Westlaw search on Michigan cases, and the last public sector bargaining case to utilize the term inextricably intertwined was that Detroit firefighter case in 2008. Inextricably intertwined with safety is a fundamentally insufficient standard to determine whether staffing should be a mandatory subject of bargaining. How do we prove that something is inextricably intertwined with safety? When the Michigan Supreme Court decided in the Detroit case that there shouldn't be an injunction against the city of Detroit on staffing levels until their Act 312 case was concluded, a firefighter was killed in the city of Detroit while a station was browned out, crossing town to get to a firefight. And there is still discussion about how that didn't happen because of the staffing levels, that could have happened anyway. So if one of my members gets killed and I still can't prove to you that staffing is inextricably intertwined with safety, what would it take? What does it take to prove that staffing is inextricably intertwined? The opponents to this bill focus on management rights. It is a fundamental management right for an employer to determine the scope and breadth of the services it wishes to provide. We do not dispute that. What we do say is, especially where firefighters are concerned, if your community has determined to provide fire services, they need to be sufficient, not only to protect the citizens of that community, but to protect the employees who are providing that service. If, as you've heard today, budgets are so constrained that they can't provide safe staffing levels, then they should consider an alternative method of providing that service. If you're going to send human beings into the breach to provide a service to citizens, they're already risking their lives. That's part of the job. And that's what firefighters get when they go to work. They get, well, you knew you were risking your life when you came to work. Of course we did. But we don't expect to risk it unnecessarily. they risk their lives unnecessarily when they have to do more with less. And many communities, as I said, I represent dozens of locals across this state. I bargain contracts for a living. I hear it all the time. I hear exactly what Wyoming is here to tell you. We have to do the best we can with what we have. The firefighters will be the first ones to tell you that there needs to be a re-examination and a new way of allocating resources to communities so that they have the resources to do this. But what I can tell you is, because of this inextricably intertwined standard, when I come to the table and I say, we just need 3 more firefighters, 1 more firefighter on each shift could make all the difference. What I get is, I don't have to talk to you about that. Staffing is a permissive subject, and I don't want to talk to you about that. And when I start making the safety argument, what I get is, here are 3 communities who have a fire station with 2 pieces of apparatus in it, staffed by a single firefighter. If those 3 communities can run a fire station with 1 firefighter and 2 pieces of apparatus, how are my 3 firefighters insufficient to provide safety? And my answer is, they're not. Your 3 firefighters are not sufficient. And no one should ever be working in a fire station by themselves. The firefighter that was killed in Detroit that I mentioned earlier, at least had a crew with him. Somebody knew what happened. What does a firefighter by himself do if he's broadsided on the way to a call? He can't even radio for help. There's no one there for him. He's there for everyone, and no one's there for him. That's what this bill is about. This bill is about allowing public employees to have a conversation about the staffing levels that they need to work under every day. The standard of inextricably intertwined is insufficient, and I know that our friends at the Mackinac Center and the Michigan Municipal League will tell you that we're sufficiently protected by the Oak Park case. And you heard already the fear that the costs will go through the roof if they need to bargain staffing levels. Some of you have already talked about Act 312 arbitration for firefighters and police officers. And yes, there is a neutral third party that determines whether or not a municipality has the ability to pay based on the evidence presented by the parties. That arbitrator isn't sitting there making this up as he or she goes along. The evidence is presented by the municipality and by the union, and a fact-based decision is made about whether the ability to pay is there. The fact that we are not talking about just staffing levels for Act 312 units, this fear of the costs is a red herring. Act 312 arbitration is actually a buffer for the employer. If we don't win our staffing level in Act 312 arbitration, it's because we couldn't prove our case. If a non-312 unit bargains for staffing, whether it's a clerk or a DPW worker, they don't have access to Act 312 arbitration. They only have non-binding fact-finding. But things have gotten to the point in this state where every municipality needs to re-examine its priorities. People are resources, and you need sufficient people to do the jobs. Those clerks don't get to go to Act 312 and prove their case and get additional staffing. Even if a fact finder says you should have more staffing, the employer has the right not to give it to them. So this worry about the cost is a red herring. The firefighters in this state deserve safe working environments. The clerks in this state deserve safe working environments. And I haven't even gone into how any worker could become physically, emotionally, or mentally harmed by having to work excessive overtime because of staffing shortages, take risks at work because they don't have someone to assist them in lifting things. And there's a myriad number of reasons that staffing is important for everybody who has a public sector job. I strongly urge you on behalf of the Michigan Professional Firefighters Union to approve House Bill 4688 and take the first step in the direction of providing safer and improved services to all the people in the state of Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. O'Hearn. Representative Metzer.
I mentioned previously that the city of Mount Clemens has 12 firefighters. When one of them moved up and out of the fire department into city management, we were short a firefighter. It took months to replace him with a Proby. And during that time, another firefighter retired. I was technically short too. That affects the safety of not only my firefighters, but of all of the residents of my city. And if it weren't for Clinton Township and Harrison and Selfridge Air Force Base, we would have been in desperate trouble. So will this bill, in your opinion, will Bill 4688 help alleviate the staffing shortage?
I can say that it will help alleviate the staffing shortage over time. The situation that we're in right now is the culmination of events that have happened over the past decade and a half, where communities have made these decisions about what to do with the limited resources they have by not replacing retired firefighters, by utilizing overtime as a means of filling gaps instead of replacing firefighters. Through attrition, we've seen some of these staffing reductions. And similarly, this bill will allow us to talk and will provide more stable workplaces. Right now, the staffing shortage we have is somewhat driven by the fact that we're having a very hard time getting high school graduates to go to the fire academy and getting those candidates to want to be paramedics. And we have countless fantastic fire-based EMS programs all over the state. I was in a community on the west side of the state yesterday that has 6 firefighters in a township that covers over 30 square miles. 6 firefighters. They have a brand new fire station, and they have more apparatus in that fire station than they have employees. They don't have enough people. Even if they did just put one person on each, they don't have enough people to run the apparatus they have. They've prioritized structures over their workforce. And we were in mediation, and they want to have a fire inspector, not called a fire inspector, because most of those are 40-hour jobs. So they can't afford to take somebody and make them a fire inspector. They want to take one of their 3 paramedics and make him do inspections while he's on duty. This department is running an advanced life support program with 3 paramedics to its name. That means 1 paramedic's on duty at all times. That's completely insufficient for that level of service. And when that paramedic is out doing an inspection on the west side of the township, and a fire comes in on the east side of the township, I guarantee you that guy is going to be flying to try to get to that fire. And it will not be safe. But it would if there were someone else to go. But when he's the only one, that's never going to be safe, ever. So yes, it will improve the staffing problem, but it won't do it overnight.
Thank you.
Representative Coons.
Thank you, sir, for coming today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How many open fire, I almost don't know how to ask the question because we have our volunteers. Is there a number? How many open firefighter positions are there in the state of Michigan? Not just under contract bargaining, but in our, I call my department a volunteer department. They're not, but that's what they're referred to. Do you understand my question? How many open positions do we have?
Well,
Is that even a knowable number?
it is. It's just not known by me. Okay.
No, it's a fair answer. That's a fair answer.
As I said, I am the general counsel for the State Firefighters Union. I represent exclusively professional represented firefighters. You heard the state president talk about the numbers that we know of in our represented departments. But as far as statewide, including volunteer and part-paid departments, I would not hazard a guess at that.
I have Mr. Sarr's contact information and we'll follow up. So thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Wagella.
So there's been a lot of conversation about the impact of a potential pending recession at some point, and that being an issue for local governments. But we've been through recessions over the last several decades, and wondering if you could talk a little bit about how has the Firefighters Union responded in those situations. I mean, my assumption would be that you've probably opened your contracts for renegotiation at certain points, and that I think that's something that we should recognize, right, is in times of financial struggle, firefighters have been there. And we're talking about staffing issues potentially being an issue. It's just something I think that needs to be recognized, is that the unions have been partners with the cities.
There is a long history of our unions partnering with cities, townships, counties. We're not oblivious to the problem of limited resources. We have consistently come out and said we believe that the allocations, we've always lobbied for increased revenue sharing. We've always pushed to get funding for vital services. When the recession hit, we did accept attrition. Given the staffing provision, we didn't have much of a choice about the attrition part of it. But I have plenty of locals that went 3 or more years in a row with no wage increase. I have several locals that I can point to that took up to 10 to 15% wage cuts to facilitate maintenance of the fire department in the community in which they work. So yes, I don't think this committee has the time to hear how much we've given over the years to help employers through the hard times. And while it's very nice to hear that Wyoming used ARPA funds for a fire station, I've negotiated lots of contracts where by the time we got to the bargaining table, employers had used up all their ARPA money already and didn't have any left for us. So when things were hard, we were there. And when things got a little easier, we were last on the list. And all we're looking to do is be at the table to talk about the thing that our lives depend on.
Representative Churches.
Thank you for being here. So my district has a lot of, I live in a really purple district, and a lot of people care about our community, and I have a very divided point of view from my firefighters and from my municipalities. So this hearing is especially informative and important for me to hear both sides. And I guess I just want to acknowledge something that's happening in the room. When people are up here, I see reactions to statements from both sides. Rolling of eyes, throwing of heads, not agreeing. I can feel the tension from these 2 points of view without any words being spoken. And that concerns me as a lawmaker, as a citizen who needs these services at times and cares about people in my community and wants them to be serviced by firefighters and municipalities to the best needs that we can. Would you say, in your professional opinion, that there is tension between municipalities and our first responders? And do you think that this legislation, it may not fix it, but do you think this legislation is a step in the right direction to bring parties together to start having conversations and begin what I think might be repair work that needs to be done between relationship building?
I hesitate to use an easy phrase, which is, it couldn't hurt, right? I don't think passing this bill is going to make it worse. I think something I neglected to say is that I have contracts with staffing provisions in them. I have employers that come to the table and say, look, we get it. We can't go below this. And they embrace the staffing provision as a means of prioritizing, as a means of being able to go to other bargaining units and non-represented employees and say, look, I have a job to do. I have to provide fire services. This is the least I can do it with, right? I need to have this many people. So I'm happy to give you an agreement that says I'll keep this many people. Because that focuses them on allocating the rest of what they have. And the people who come to me now and say, I don't have to talk to you about that, that's how you get the kind of tension you're describing. When one party comes and says, what can we do? And the answer is, I don't have to do anything. That's the recipe for tension. If I come and say, what can we do? And the response is, I don't know, let's look at this, I don't have much to work with. That's a conversation that I can have. But I can't have a conversation with, I don't have to talk to you about that.
So would you say what we're currently doing is not adequately addressing a problem that needs to be fixed?
By what we're currently doing, you mean the inextricably intertwined standard? Because that is absolutely insufficient. It's untenable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Herron, why is the inextricably intertwined or entwined with public safety standard pronounced by former Justice Taylor so insufficient? And why do you suppose you haven't found it in a law search in any published decision since 2008?
I believe the reason we haven't seen it challenged again or even attempted to meet it is because we view it as a futility. Inextricably intertwined, as I said, if I can't convince you that one person driving a fire engine by him or herself is not safe, and I can't convince you that having had a firefighter killed shows how unsafe it is, what does inextricably intertwined mean? I challenge anyone sitting here today to tell me what I could say to you to have you say, oh yeah, that's inextricably intertwined. That's a no-brainer. That's a real mandatory staffing issue. It doesn't exist. It's an illusory standard. It's something that cannot be met. And if it can be met, it can only be met in the most dire circumstances. And I suggest that if you can meet the inextricably intertwined standard, you should have fixed your staffing problem a long time before that.
Thank you. We don't have any absent members. There being no further business before this committee, we are adjourned.